Good morning. My name is Dean Trulear, and I work with the Healing Communities faith-based reentry model that was developed by the Annie Casey Foundation, and I'll be presenting that model in a few minutes. Glad that you all are here.
My name is Terry Kuhns, and I direct a mentoring program with a Christian organization called Operation Transformation, based out of Port Huron, Michigan, and I will be presenting our program after Dean presents Healing Communities.
The way we decided on how to make our presentation today was decided primarily based on the fact that what I'm going to be presenting to you today is a framework, whereas what Terry's going to be presenting is more the nuts and bolts of faith-based mentoring for men and women returning from incarceration. We're both fortunate in that he's from Michigan, I've done work in Michigan, so our terminology will even match, though the accents probably won't. What we have here in Healing Communities is a framework that was developed by the Annie E. Casey Foundation to help congregations and the faith community become part of the entire reentry movement, so that it's a framework that can work around a mentoring program and that can even strengthen the mentoring program by raising the consciousness of congregations around the issue of reentry. The Casey Foundation has been working in a number of poor communities with kids and families over several decades, and in the course of doing that has tried to identify issues based not so much on what comes from the top down, but what comes from the bottom up. As they talk with residents, as they talk with community leaders, how do they assess the issues that are impacting their neighborhoods? And as we talked with more and more men and women in the neighborhoods in which we were working, they all identified the impact of incarceration and reentry on the children and families in those communities as a central issue. And they also talked about the fact that they were under-resourced in terms of programs and in terms of political will. The one thing that they all agreed on, however, is that every poor neighborhood has congregations. Eugene Rivers from Boston says that there are basically two institutions that you can find in any poor neighborhood. That's churches and bars, so you have to figure out which one you want to organize. And so we chose churches, or more broadly put, congregations. And we began by sitting down with congregation leaders and having them watch a movie or a documentary called A Justice That Heals. I don't know how many of you have seen this documentary. If you haven't, it's an excellent documentary about a congregation led by Father Overshaw in Evanston, Illinois. One of the young men in his church, a Latino by the name of Mario, gets in an altercation with a white young man from the neighborhood, shoots and kills him. Father Overshaw says, okay, lock him up, throw away the key, and then somebody says, but that's Mario from our church, and all of a sudden his attitude changes, and you watch the church change in its attitude, you watch the church reach out to this family from the congregation, this family from the neighborhood, and actually begin the process of reconciliation between the two families so that they end up actually worshiping together. And we showed that to a number of congregation leaders and asked them the question, what does this tell us about the potential for being involved with the Marios of this world? Those who have committed crimes, who evidence a sense of remorse, and who don't need to be cut off any further from the community. Out of that session, in this particular story, which is outlined here, we developed a vision for talking about engaging congregations in the ministry of healing and restoration. And what became really apparent was that for even those congregations that had already thought about doing reentry programs, none of them had thought about the idea of working with people or beginning with people in their own congregation. In other words, their primary understanding of reentry was, let's go down to the county jail, or let's go to the state prison, or let's contact the reentry council, whoever's doing reentry in our community, and let's have them tell us who to work with, which is how a lot of the mentoring programs work with, and there's a role for that. Meanwhile, back on planet Earth, as a pastor, I'm stepping over 5 families in my church that have somebody locked up. Plus, what I've done is I've taken an area of ministry or an area of outreach that impacts my congregation, and instead of mobilizing the congregation around it, I've taken 3 people, given them Terry Kuhns special training on how to be a mentor, and it no longer is the business of the rest of the congregation. I'm not called to prison ministry, which is really a problem in the Christian tradition, because if you're not called to prison ministry, it really becomes a problem, or it really becomes a challenge, because the whole Christian religion is based on the death of an inmate. So, you know, so if you don't want to deal with inmates, you probably should not be a Christian. And all of the major religions of our world have something to say about dealing with people and its leadership suffering political consequences and incarceration. And so the starting point for the Healing Communities program, or the Healing Communities framework, is beginning with members of our own congregations, so that it doesn't become an outreach ministry as much as it becomes a caregiving ministry within the congregation itself. It builds on the unique strengths of the faith community. The fact that faith communities have value systems that support this kind of work, that is, healthy faith communities. One of the things we were looking for was a way that the whole faith community could be involved in this work without having to have a community development corporation, or without having to have a grant writing process. What is something that any church can do? I go to a small storefront, non-denominational Pentecostal church. We barely pay our pastor, so there's no staff. And we do this with 30 or 40 members, because it's just part of the life of the congregation. It's not a specialized ministry. Some congregations have sick and shut-in lists. We have a who's on trial, who's locked up list. And it's published. It's just part of what we do. And that's what we're trying to say to the faith community. This doesn't have to be a specialized ministry. What it can be is just part of what you do. And then within the context of what you do, the issue gets raised to the point where when a Terry Kuhns or your state or your county comes to you and says, we need mentors, the issue has already been raised, the consciousness has already been lifted, the stigma has already been dealt with, and now my mentor pool is larger, because this is something that my congregation already does, because we began by working with people in our own congregation using our own values resources.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So in your congregation, you keep a list of who's incarcerated, do
Yep.
I understand that correctly? And are the people who are incarcerated okay with that? I mean,
Yep.
they don't mind to be, and
Yeah, because the
so-
stigma's been reduced in the
Yeah,
congregation.
I think it's great.
Well-
So the congregation kind of carries the people who are incarcerated mindfully, and can mentor them and become part of the.
We know when they get arrested.
Yeah. So you publish that too? You let people know?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I got arrested last week. I'm facing trial. I need your prayers. And so the church prays. You know, somebody's going to trial. They write letters to the judge. They just do that.
Yeah.
This one guy that got locked up last summer, his wife can't afford to take the phone calls. So she goes over to another member's house every Wednesday night, and she takes the collect call. There's no program. They just do it. Just do it. And as a Christian congregation, part of our issue is, well, Matthew 25, visiting sick people, feeding hungry people, dealing with the prisoner, all on the same list. The whole church does everything else. Why do I need a specialist for this one? So that's kind of our reading of the Christian tradition. Part of what we've done, based on our work with folks in Michigan, is we've tried to develop different language about what it means to do reentry. We understand that the political system has its language, whether it's ex-offenders or formerly incarcerated persons, the new coin of the realm, as it were. We've been using the term returning citizens to refer to people coming back from incarceration. Lonnie McLeod, who was one of my students at Sing Sing Prison, who eventually became the United Church of Christ pastor, used to bristle when people called him an ex-offender. He said, how would you like it if somebody introduced you using language that referred to the worst part of your life? And so we've, in our handbooks and in our curriculum, we use different kinds of language. We talk about healing communities because we're trying to get the entire congregation to wrap their arms around men and women who are returning and their families, as opposed to this is the reentry ministry over here, just like this is the youth ministry over here. It's not a specialized ministry. It's the work of the entire congregation. It's strengthening individuals, families, and communities through creating a sense of welcome and inclusion, reducing the stigma and the shame surrounding incarceration, fostering the transformation of hearts, minds, and communities, facilitating acceptance of responsibilities for actions and behaviors on the part of the returning citizens, and building networks of pro-social support that will assist them in their walk back through in society. Healing Communities offers a ministry of presence. It's not a service delivery system. It's a we'll be there. When we were working with churches in Indianapolis, somebody says, well, our guys need jobs. Your program doesn't deal with getting jobs. I said, no, but our program says you can be there when a guy does the job training, makes 5 applications and doesn't get one, and then says, I need to go hustle. Because at that point, the guy who runs the job training program is not in the picture. So somebody's got to be providing that support network, so when I'm thinking, should I go back and hustle because I did everything they told me to do and I didn't get a job, who's walking with me at that point? If we're integrated within the congregation, somebody's doing that. It also means that we care not only for the individual who is returning from incarceration, but also that person's family, the victim of the crime. One of the first congregations that began working with this was in a situation very much like Father Oldershaw's church, where there was a killing that involved 2 families in the same congregation. And so the congregation actually had to be involved in working with both families through the process of the trial and actually diffused a potential courtroom fight. The family of the crime victim, returning citizens and their family, and the community affected by crime. It's a framework that enables me to engage anyone who is connected with the person who is incarcerated. And it's a framework that also can be implemented at the time of arrest, during the time of the trial, at sentencing, while in prison, or during the pre-release program and throughout the process of reentry. For purposes of what we're doing here, I'll be focusing more so on the reentry process, but the framework is broader than that and can be used virtually at any point within the interface with the criminal justice system. What the Healing Communities model does not require is setting up a program or a nonprofit or getting funding. It's just simply a matter of taking existing resources of caring, networks, and values and applying them to this particular situation. I like to put it this way: what if we treated incarceration like we do hospitalization? If you're in a congregation, whatever the religious tradition, if somebody gets sick, people go see them, people call, they send cards, they make sure the family's okay. What if we did the same thing around incarceration that we do around hospitalization? And this particular slide we kept in because we've actually been working with a number of different organizations. In Indianapolis, we're working with the Archdiocese. In Grand Rapids, Michigan, we're working with a group that's largely Christian Reform. In Washington, D.C., we're working with a group that is United Church of Christ, and we have a formal relationship with the Progressive Baptist Convention. Yes, sir.
On the spectrum of diversity in this area of healing the communities, what is your experience with trying to involve, say, when you're dealing with inmates that may have outside of the Christian belief, but walking with the Muslim faith or the Buddhist faith? Does that, are you only targeting inmates who are looking to walk the Christian life, or are your people ready to deal with those who have a Jewish background, a Buddhist background, a Muslim background?
There are 2 answers to that question, okay? The first answer is that the starting point is not the inmate. The starting point is the congregation. So I start with the congregation, whatever that religious tradition is, whether it's Christian, Jewish, Islamic, etc. So that the inmate comes into the picture because the inmate has family in my congregation. The second answer to that question is that how one would respond. Let's say I have a family here and their son is Muslim. Then the question becomes, how would we respond to any family member of another faith, whether they're an inmate or whether it's an interfaith marriage, so that it's adaptable within the congregation. And part of what we've done with that in mind is there are actually 3 versions of the handbook. There is an interfaith version of the handbook that is designed to be, that's what they're using in Michigan. The Michigan Department of Corrections has adopted this model to work with the faith community. And so obviously they need a non-sectarian, very, very broad-based understanding of the model to work with the faith community. So we have an interfaith version that's adaptable to any religious tradition. We have another one that was specifically designed for the Christian tradition, and then the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which is an African American denomination, wanted one that was specifically geared toward the black community. So we have 3 different versions, and the material is malleable enough that if a group says we like this but we'd like to make alterations, we'll work with you to do something in a different tradition. We're currently talking with the Center for Islamic Studies at Hartford Seminary to produce an Islamic version. So that's how I'd respond to your question. Okay. There are basically 5 chapters in the handbook. The story that I mentioned earlier, and by the way, there are 2 versions of the story. There's the story from that documentary, and then the African American denomination said we really need a black story. So there's also a story that can be inserted, or that comes with the African American version, that comes from a black church in Houston, Texas, where a mother of a slain woman actually becomes the surrogate mother of her daughter's killer. And we start with the story because congregations are places where people are motivated by empathy. Get them to thinking about what would your response be in this kind of a situation? How can your life, or how can your vision of men and women who are incarcerated be changed by virtue of engaging these stories? Because part of what we're looking for, actually the primary context of what we're looking for, is a different consciousness within the congregation itself. The second chapter is stuff that everybody in this room knows, but a lot of people in congregations do not know, which is, you know, the basic numbers and statistics on mass incarceration. The third chapter is on the role of the faith leader, the pastor, the imam, the rabbi, the monsignor. The fourth chapter is on things that people in the congregation can do as part of the model. And then there's a chapter on advocacy and networking. If we're saying to congregations, do what you do best, then there also needs to be some direction in terms of how to network with other organizations that do what they do best. And then there's an appendix of resources. This second chapter, there's nothing, you know, this is all stuff, again, I'm showing you the PowerPoint I'd be showing if I was working with a group of congregations or people who are going to be doing TA with congregations. And so we make sure that they know these numbers. And what's interesting is that, though, just as part of the process, because you're in the room, you know, I'm making, and I don't think it's an assumption, I'm clear that you know these numbers. It's fascinating when you sit down with congregations and they look at this and they're like, I didn't know. They're overwhelmed. Even in some of the poorest neighborhoods in Detroit, Indianapolis, they'll look at these numbers and they'll say, I had no idea. And it becomes another factor in the motivational process. In the third chapter, we talk about what the pastors and the imams and other religious leaders can do. Identifying other religious leaders that can do this, because we try to get congregations organized together around this. Usually we try to find partnerships that already exist between congregations, maybe a denominational association or maybe a neighborhood group of congregations that are willing to work on this as a peer learning community of congregations. And they form what we call a prayer circle. It's a collaborative process. Not every group calls it a prayer circle. That's the language that the Baptists used when they developed their handbook. We have them study the guide, going through it chapter by chapter. We spend time with the leaders, and we have the leaders do the training themselves so that it becomes a real peer learning process. We want the faith leaders to also learn about the issues, to be better informed both on the nature of mass incarceration and on what kinds of structures are in place to address it, what kinds of reentry programs are there, what are the state policies. And so we try to make sure that they are more informed on the issue. By demonstrating leadership, we want them to cast the vision. We want them to make it a part of their preaching. I mentioned my congregation. My pastor actually preached a sermon called Early Release. And he went through, because after Daniel got locked up and everyone was disappointed, he said, well, you know, God's not finished. Maybe God will give him early release. And then he went through the Bible and named all of the people that got early release. He started talking about Joseph getting early release. He started talking about Jeremiah getting early release. He started talking about John on the Isle of Patmos getting early release, Peter getting early release. And then he proceeded to talk about the resurrection of Jesus as early release. I mean, so it's part of the congregation's language. It's not a specialty stuff. We found that pastors who are also willing to talk about their own experience with incarceration, whether they've been personally incarcerated or having someone in the family. Finding ways to create the space so that the members of my congregation can say, I have a son who's locked up, or I have a daughter who's locked up, or I've been locked up and I've been ashamed to talk about it. That's part of setting the tone of welcoming and inclusion, and we have resources in the handbook of what faith leaders can do and resources they can apply to help raise the issue so that it's not stigmatizing to men and women returning from incarceration, and it's not stigmatizing to their families also. Identifying who is in need. Who are the people in our congregation that are dealing with this? We create the space and then we find ways to identify them. Several churches do altar calls and say, if you have someone who's locked up, come forward, we want to pray for you. Other congregations do it through word of mouth. But if you don't create the tone of welcome and inclusion, then people are going to continue to sit and suffer in silence. I went to a congregation in Wilmington, Delaware, and preached on Acts chapter 12 out of the Christian scriptures. And it was fascinating because Acts chapter 12, those of you that may know the story, Peter gets locked up. He's the apostle. He's locked up. They pray for him all night long. He gets miraculously released from prison. He comes back to the church, knocks on the door, and they won't let him in. That is a great metaphor. Okay? That's a great metaphor. And so, we pray for the prisoner, but then when he comes back, we don't want him. And I spent 2 hours listening to people's stories after church. And this was a middle-class African-American church. The pastor was a retired investment banker. You look out in the congregation, they have more degrees than a thermometer. And people wanted to talk about my son. In fact, the chairman of the deacon board says, how do you know my grandson? I said, I don't know your grandson. He said, yes, you do. You said Jamal's coming home in 3 months. I said, well, that was just a figure of speech. He said, well, my grandson's name is Jamal. He's coming home in 3 months. And his wife told me we had already made up our minds that when he comes home, he has burned all his bridges. After dealing with Acts chapter 12, we're going to call a family meeting, play the tape of the sermon, and try to figure out what we're going to do, because that's still our grandson. So that it takes leadership at the top to set that kind of a tone, and that's what we ask the rabbi, the priest, the pastor to do. Create the space where people can come forward as they did that Sunday and tell their stories. One girl says to me, she's in tears, she's 17 years old, so I haven't seen my dad in 16 years. He's been locked up 16 years, and my mom doesn't want me to see him. But I know he's coming home. What should I do? I said, talk to your pastor. I'm just visiting. When we talked to the pastor, we found out afterwards that the mother has changed her life. She's burned her bridges to the past. She went back to school. She now has a PhD as a university professor and wants absolutely nobody to know that her daughter's father is a convict. And so this is a congregation issue. This is not a reentry program issue. You hear where I'm going with this? It's not so we're trying to create a framework and get from the framework then to the program. Identify who in the congregation will be willing to be the volunteers, and then to study and preach the story. The role of the congregation to create a climate of inclusion, to be present and listen, to visit families experiencing the pain and shame, to welcome returning citizens back home. It's the same thing that congregations do when people face any other kinds of challenges or crises in their lives. Creating formal and informal networks of support. Learn more about the criminal justice system and mass incarceration so that they'll be in a position to refer people or to walk with them through other types of programs. You don't have to start the program yourself. If you can identify where the programs are, you can be a presence in walking with a person through those situations and through those programs. Identifying partners such as other congregations, departments of corrections, other nonprofit organizations and other service providers, and identifying the resources that are in the community that can provide some of the other support systems. Support for the families, mentoring families and children using the Amachi model or other models. One of the things they're doing in Detroit is they're using church vans to support families in visitation. I've always thought that congregations that have vans have a problem anyway. I never understood how, like in the Christian tradition, they have this song, I need you, you need me. They all hold hands and sing that. And then when people need ride homes, they don't give them a ride. Got to have a van. That's why I have a van, because nobody's got time to give anybody a ride. But if you've got a church van, you can use that for transportation to prison. Helps children stay in touch with the parent while in prison. There's a group in Philadelphia that actually goes to the county jail and takes videos of mothers reading stories in the nursery and then brings the video back to the child. Identify material needs. I mentioned in response to this gentleman's question, the family in our church that collect calls for the wife of an inmate. And none of this requires a grant. It's just motivating existing assets and resources. Helping crime victims and their family is also a matter of understanding the anger of people who've been victimized by crime, understanding the grief of people who've been victimized by crime, walking with them in the healing and moving with them towards reconciliation and restoration. And then in the last chapter, we talk about networking with other organizations and also becoming part of a public policy advocacy network. And these are all issues you're familiar with. I'll just do the short version in the interest of time so I can take my seat and let Terry give us the real nuts and bolts on this. But one of the things that we know about getting congregations active around policy is that congregations are best motivated or mobilized around policy when they have encountered the effects of the policy in the day-to-day work with people who are affected by that policy. In other words, I can come in and talk about we need criminal justice reform until I'm blue in the face. But if we begin working with our folks and community folks who are returning from prison and facing the collateral sanctions in housing, facing the collateral sanctions in employment, facing the collateral sanctions in voter registration, eventually my congregation is going to say, we can do something about this. It's sort of like Martin Luther King used to talk about the Good Samaritan. He used to talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan. He said, if you go down that road and there are enough people beaten up on the road, it's time to stop picking the guy up and go up and find out how come the road's not safe. And so I can say to you with confidence that the reason, one of the major reasons that people with felony convictions have the right to vote in the state of Maryland is because the African Methodist Episcopal Church interrupted their annual conference in 2004 in Annapolis, Maryland, and marched on the State House, 400 strong. Because they had done a lot of work with returning citizens, saw what the impact was in terms of the right to vote, and they went to the State House and demonstrated their support for the reform of voter registration law. Getting started is first to embrace the concept, studying the guide and using the guide, pretty self-explanatory stuff. Creating a climate of inclusion, introducing the vision of the congregation, and then begin to build partnerships with other congregations and other faith leaders. And we put addressing stigma and shame in big letters because we really believe that at the heart of what we're trying to do is to get congregations to behave differently towards men and women who have been incarcerated, to think differently about them, and in the process of that, they're more willing to be engaged not only in welcoming them home, but also in the very specific kinds of programs that you all are involved in, whether you're doing this from a congregation perspective, a faith-based perspective, or working with one of the criminal justice systems, county, state, or federal. So, thanks.
Well, all right. We will move on then with the next piece. First of all, let me say thank you for coming and being a part of this conference. And I am very excited to be in a room with this many people who are as crazy as myself. I don't know that if you guys ever get comments from your friends, as I do, but my friends will say things like, you know 1,400 people who have gotten out of prison. Do you ever get nervous? Does that ever, I'm seeing some nods. Some of you get comments like that. Maybe your family, maybe your friends, they don't necessarily get it. What I always say, in jest back though, is, are you kidding me? I have 1,400 guys who aren't afraid to kill watching my back. It's actually a very good scenario. I am a firm believer in what Dr. Trulear, Dean, excuse me.
Thank you.
I have great respect for this man who just spoke, and it's very difficult for me to not call him Dr. Trulear. For what Dean has presented to you, Healing Communities is a fantastic model. And I wanted to start my part of the presentation this morning by giving you an example of how this can play out in a mentoring relationship, because that's what we do. I direct a mentoring program that I'll explain to you in just a moment. But just recently, I helped to put a mentoring relationship together, really just providing the support services for that mentoring relationship. It was already in formation, as you'll see. That is a great example to me of what you have just heard with Healing Communities. Young man named Troy, grew up in a church, chose a different path though. Very involved in drugs, very involved with breaking and entering and gang-related violence, things of that nature. And the decision that he chose to make at one point in his late teens was to break into that church that had never done anything other than just love him. And broke into the pastor's office, stole a bunch of stuff, destroyed a bunch of things, and was caught by the police and sentenced to prison for that charge. And what a lot of people would have done in that scenario was write Troy off. What a lot of pastors, and having been a pastor for 12 years myself, I can say this, what a lot of pastors would have said was, you know, I hope the best for Troy, but he's no longer my problem. Someone else is going to have to be in Troy's corner in the future. That's not what Brent did. Brent is the pastor of that church. And Brent today, after having walked with Troy through his incarceration, after having visited him in prison multiple times, writing letters, phone calls, providing support for Troy's family, Brent is serving as Troy's mentor today. That's restoration. That's what we're talking about today. That's someone who's willing to go the extra mile to be in someone's corner. Operation Transformation, the organization that I direct the mentoring program for, has partnered with the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative. And I just want to briefly tell you our story. It might be similar to some of your stories, it may not be. We started doing this 4 years ago. Boy, folks, I'll tell you, I don't come to you today as an expert in this at all. I don't know if there are any quote-unquote experts in this yet. You're going to be the experts here in the coming years, because this is still such a burgeoning idea in my thinking. We started doing this 4 years ago. We were asked to contract with the state of Michigan to provide Christian mentoring, faith-based mentoring, but we are a Christian organization, so we are faith-based mentoring for men and women coming out of the prison system just in one county. Very small county, St. Clair. It's north of Detroit. We see about 125 to 130 guys a year come out of prison, come back to our county. It's very, very small. At that point, that was a 10-hour-a-week job for me. I loved doing it, but I always saw it as something I was going to do part-time while I was pastoring. Well, here's what happened. We started to see some results from that, and I'll share some of those figures with you here in a second. But as the results were coming in, and as we saw that the guys and the ladies that we were working with were going back to prison less and less, the state came back to us again, and through MPRI asked us to take on 5 more counties. After 12 months, we ended up contracting with the entire thumb. You know how everybody in Michigan uses their hand, right? Okay, the entire thumb of Michigan. So now we're in St. Clair, Sanilac, Lapeer, Tuscola counties, Huron County, and we also were asked to take on Macomb County. We went from 1 to 6 counties in a year. My part-time job became a very full-time job. Let's fast forward a couple more years to last summer. We just picked up 3 more counties: Saginaw, Bay, and Midland counties. We now have a staff of 6. I'm the full-time guy, and there's 5 other people who put work into this part-time. So it's a growing idea. We're in 9 counties now. Within the last 4 years, we've reached out to over 1,400 returning citizens in those 4 years. We have trained and activated 600 volunteer mentors. Couldn't do this on our own. You know, this is something that as you're getting started, you might do a lot of it yourself. Probably several of you in the room, and quite honestly, I still do this myself too. You probably actually mentor the guys or the ladies that you're working with. As you grow, and that's what I'm going to hope for you, that you will grow, because this is an idea that needs to spread. You're going to have to recruit a volunteer base, and we're going to talk about how to go about doing that today. In the last 4 years, we've established 500 one-to-one mentoring relationships. But really for us, it's about that one person who asks for help. And that is not just a tagline, that is something we firmly believe in. My hero made a comment once, Luke 4:18-19, he said this: "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." We are to be in that role today, I believe. I want to tell you about a guy named Mike, just as we get going on this issue. Mike's story here. Mike was released from prison almost 2 years ago. He took my class shortly before his release inside of the correctional facility. And he had a variety of charges, everything from breaking and entering. He had a CSC, a criminal sexual conduct charge. And what he knew for sure is that he wanted to get his life back. He's 1 month away from his release from prison. This is what he wrote on his application for our program. He said, "I need a friend, emotional support and networking. I need a new way of life." Listen to this: "I'm stubborn, love sports, I'm smart, hardworking, loyal, and love music. I want more than anything to reestablish my life." You know, this is someone who's seeing himself maybe through different eyes. He's seeing the good within himself, right? And our job then as a mentoring organization is to help bring that about. Well, there's another guy in this equation, and his name is Paul. Paul is as straight-laced as it gets. Paul is a Nazarene pastor. The only thing he's ever done wrong is a speeding ticket. And so you think, now what possibly could bring these two guys together? Paul came along with me on a Thursday night to a transitional house that I go to every Thursday night. It's a place where when guys are getting out of prison, it's a 3-quarter house. They go there for free housing, provides support services for them. I'm there every Thursday night. I brought Paul, a pastor friend of mine, along with me. This is what he wrote to me later that evening. I just want to read you a piece of his email to me that he sent later that night. He said, "I want to thank you for the invite to the cookout Thursday night. It sure hit the spot. And I'm not talking about the hot dogs, though they were good too. I thank God for the wonderful people I lead at Bethel. I can't tell you how good they've been to me and how good God has been to me through them during these last 4 very difficult years. As much as I love God's people in the church, as I left Thursday night and looked at the group of men, I couldn't help but think that I might have been closer to Jesus there with them than I am on Sunday mornings. I don't know how to say that and not sound arrogant. God help me. I have nothing to cling to and claim but His grace. But I just wonder if Jesus would rather be at the Morehouse instead of at our Sunday morning holy huddles. May God also help me as I attempt to lead these fine people to not only gather them for a huddle, but to help them to get out and run the plays that would please God. I know that starts with me, and I thank you for giving me the support and opportunity to participate in MPRI. It has been good. Keep up the God work. Your brother on the journey, Paul." So that was Paul's response when he spent that evening with us. The great thing about this is that these stories, Mike's story and Paul's story, became interwoven. Paul became Mike's mentor, and he's mentored him for 2 years. This is a 2-year-old mentor relationship that has been a wonderful thing. The Macomb Daily News, which is the local newspaper in their county, ran a story on it. Let me share with you just a piece of that story from the local newspaper. When Michael Vitale was released from prison in August 2008, he had no home, no money, no transportation, no job, and no friends. Does that sound familiar to any of the guys you're working with? Imagine so. But he had more than many new parolees do. He had family support, a desire to succeed, and the backing of the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative, which assists with employment, housing, transportation, family intervention, anger management, health care, substance abuse, and mental health treatment. For Vitale, the program offered one more thing: a mentor. "I don't know where I'd be without Paul," said Vitale of his mentor and friend Paul Mabry, pastor for the Bethel Church of the Nazarene in Macomb Township. "My dad lives in Hawaii, and I didn't have a lot of positive influences. Paul is obviously someone who has his life together." Vitale, who worked in electrical design and repair for the auto industry before he went to prison 6 years ago, was hooked on mentoring after hearing about its ability to reduce the return rate. On the other end, Mabry's family and friends were concerned about his decision to spend time with an ex-con. I was a bit nervous going in, Mabry admitted. I've never even had a speeding ticket. Now, more than 1 year later, Mabry and Vitale talk and text regularly, meeting for coffee and recently sharing barbecue ribs in Mabry's backyard after building patio steps together. You don't have to have special skills or know prison culture to be a mentor, Mabry said. You don't have to fear for your life. You just have to be able to love people and pick up the phone to say, hey, how are you doing? That's what mentoring's about to me, is bringing those types of relationships together. This is one of our independent studies that we've done. We've redone this study 3 times. But basically in this one, what we tried to display was that we tracked all of the guys in our counties coming out on parole. And it was really very simple. I put them into one of 2 categories. If they came out and they did not have a mentor through our program, I put them into one category. If they came out of prison and chose to have a mentor and they had a good, solid mentoring relationship, I put them into another category. Here's what we found out. The guys who did not have a mentor of any substance, right, they had met less than 7 times. The mentoring relationship never really took root. For those men, 46% of those guys went back to prison within 2 years. Now, we've repeated this study 3 times, and the numbers always come up within 1%. So I see it as being fairly accurate. 46% of the guys without a mentor in their life have gone back to prison within a 2-year period. Now, when we were first asked to do this by the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative, and let me tell you this, we deal completely through contractual relationships. We do not have grants that we work with. We contract with the State Reentry Initiative. That's how we work. When they asked us to do this, when we accepted that challenge, what they told us was that if you could reduce recidivism with the guys that you're working with by 5%, you will have paid your budget 10 times over. This is what we gave them. The guys that we were working with were only back in prison at a rate of 16%. Now, I'm not going to stand before you and say that's just because of the mentoring program. See, I've known enough of these guys to realize something, that the guys who have it up here, the men and the women, I should say, forgive me ladies, I always say guys because it's about 98% to 2% men that we work with compared to 2% ladies. But the ones who are coming out, the returning citizens who have it up here, that they are going to succeed on their parole, they are going to make those positive changes, they also tend to be the ones who take in as much help as they can get. Oh, you're willing to give me a bus pass so I can make my appointments? Sure, I'll take that bus pass. You have a clothing voucher? Okay, that's great. Housing? Fantastic. And they also are willing to take on a mentoring relationship. We run our program maybe differently than some of the other programs that are here. Our program is not mandated by parole officers. We won't allow that. The men and women who sign up and are a part of our program do so because they want to be a part of the program. And we found that to be a very successful way to work.
When you talk about recidivism, is it parole violation or new charge?
Both in.
Okay, so either a
Correct.
violation is
any return to prison.
Any return, yeah.
Very good question. Right. And so, right, if the parole violation returns them to prison, that would be under the definition of recidivism.
In
essence.
prison rather than like a alternative short time in jail, is that still counted as going back to?
No.
Okay.
No, that would not be. So, for instance, great question. So,
corrective sort of thing. Like
if it's a corrective, like say a drug rehab or something of that nature, that would not be part of that statistic. That's correct. That's correct. What I want to try to convince you of today, that the key to this really, at least in our instance, and you can, run this through your own matrix and framework and consider it, but the key for us has been collaborative relationships. And I really have targeted 3 aspects to that, to how that has helped us move forward with this concept. Collaborative relationships that open doors, to make our program known to the people we serve, to recruit volunteer mentors from the community, collaborative relationships that build bridges to other service providers and community stakeholders, and for future program development and expansion, and then collaborative relationships that provide a seat at the table to influence current policy and have a voice in the future direction. Let me take you through each of those. I want to show you this diagram here first, though. What this does is implement something that actually Leanne Duran, who you heard in the general session a few minutes ago, kind of a concept she helped to establish for the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative. We took this idea of the 3 phases, getting ready, going home, and staying home. the 3 different phases of someone's exit from prison, and ask the question, now, how can we, as a nonprofit faith-based organization, come alongside of the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative, and how can we help to serve? You know, the one thing that I would really encourage you to think about is that as you go to meetings, as you begin these collaborative relationships, see yourself as a servant. I would say to you very strongly that our success with this and moving forward with this idea has been because any table we come to, we ask the question, how can we help? How can we serve? Not hey, we have all the answers in the faith community, you have to do things our way. No, we come to the table and say, how can we help? How can we serve you? This is what we've sought to do here. We've tried to establish relationships with the parole department, and in all 9 counties that we work in, we have good, strong relationships with each parole department. We've established relationships with each of the correctional facilities that men are released to and ladies are released to in our 9-county area. And so, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. We've established relationships with the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative itself, and we've established relationships with the faith community. Those 4 layers really, I think, have been very much the key that has allowed us to do what we do. I'm going to flesh that out here as we go. Just one quick thought on time and work management. As I've processed the last 4 years of my position, it really it's not meant to be a peace symbol without the bottom part there, but I really think this kind of breaks down into 3 areas that I spend my time in as far as the management of the mentoring program. Recruiting and training clients. You're going after those returning citizens. In other words, you have to let them know that you're out there in some way, and I'll give you a thought as to how to do that here in a moment. You have to recruit and train your mentors. Again, you guys can't do this all by yourself. As you grow, you're going to need volunteer help. And then case management is of course, an important piece as well. Breaking that down further, if in all of this, I believe, is in the handouts that you have. Recruiting potential mentors, recruiting potential clients, case management, and how we do that with each of those different areas. We're going to walk through each of those in just a moment. Collaborative relationships for us open doors to make our program known to the people we serve. Our clients are the returning citizens. In my mind, that's who I work for. I certainly don't work for the parole department, and I certainly don't work for the DOC of Michigan. I work for the men and women who are coming out of prison. So how do you recruit those clients? Well, here are a couple thoughts. For us, we do it in really 2 different ways. We go after them when they're already in the community, and the way we would do that is by building that relationship with the parole office. I receive probably 5 to 10 emails a week from parole agents with a possible client that we could work with. Now, the parole agent is aware that the way we function is that it can't be mandated to them, okay? And so the parole agent isn't saying to me, please provide a mentor for this individual. But what he or she is doing is providing me with their name and their contact number, and then I call the client, or someone who works for me now calls the client and asks them that question, would you like to have a mentor through our organization? Okay, so we have lots of community referrals that happen. Probably, and this is the piece that I'll flesh out here in a second, but the most effective way that we have found to recruit clients is through offering a voluntary prison inreach class. And that is how we have recruited the majority of our clients. So let's look at that. One effective way, a pre-release inreach class. We do this inside of the correctional facility. It's a one-time, and I'm sorry, I did use the word voluntary a second ago. The class itself is mandatory. And so everyone who receives a parole coming out of the correctional facilities, coming back to our counties, takes my class. And in that class, we present the program to them, and then we let them decide. They know when they walk in the door, hey, you have to spend 3 hours with this guy. What better do you have to do anyways, right? And you come in, sit down, hear the information. He's going to make it interactive. You're going to talk through some of these issues. And then at the end of the class, you can make the decision whether or not you're interested in wanting the program. And really that last sentence is so important. They have to want the help for this to really be effective. Here's what we cover in the class. We talk about the father absence issue. We have dozens and dozens of testimonies from our clients, from men and women who have been on parole, like many of them now because we're 4 years old are off parole, and what they have said about the value of a mentoring relationship. We have testimonies from mentors in that class. We have success stories, men and women who have put their lives back together and their stories. We have information on other services that are available. We answer the question, what is mentoring? And why do you need a good mentor? We offer strategies for success, and then at the end of the class they receive a mentee application that they can then fill out and ask for a mentor if they're interested. Here's what we found, and this is just over a 2-year period, tracking 6 of our counties. But in those 6 counties, over 24 months, 690 returning citizens were asked if they would like to have a mentor for the mentoring program. And what we found was that 267, or 39%, participated in a voluntary mentoring relationship. 39% asked to be a part of this. Now, someone asked a question earlier that I thought maybe I could try to answer. Dean's program and my program, the one distinct difference in the way we approach it is Dean made the comment to you earlier that his starting point is the church. Our starting point is the client. Okay, and so there is a distinction there. When they take my class inside the correction facility, I'm looking at them as an individual and saying, what can we do to help you have a successful reentry? Okay, so the question was made, or the question was asked earlier, what about people who come from different faith backgrounds? Here we are, the Christian organization. How do you handle that? The first thing I make very clear to the guys in the class is that you do not have to be of the Christian faith to ask for a mentor. Our program is not about proselytizing. Our program is about helping men and women stay out of prison, helping them re-enter, helping them have a successful parole experience so that they can get on with their lives. That's what our program is about. And we have entertained, and we have met with other faith leaders. I had an imam from the Muslim community approach me. He's come through our training process, and if he's willing, I'd love to see him take some steps and be able to provide some mentors as well. And so we try to, as much as we can, offer mentors from other faiths as well. That's that. Let's move on. Don, yes, question on that.
Yeah, not on that per se, but on like the last thing where you have a mentee application.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you essentially take anyone who applies to your program, or is there kind of a screening process that goes on? And if we have folks that are, hardcore addictions and things like that, what other ancillary services do you offer? How does it all come together?
Excellent, excellent. First part of your question, will we take anyone? Absolutely. We made the commitment when we started that we were not going to rule people out because of a certain crime. Actually, I would say probably, and this is usually the one people are referencing, that would distinguish somebody, I guess. Especially, probably would say probably 40% of the men that we work with have criminal sexual conduct charges. We have men who have committed first-degree murder. As a matter of fact, Dante, who I'm going to tell you about in a second, served 43 years in prison for first-degree murder. So our attitude has always been to whomever will come. We are going to do whatever we can to help to whomever will come. The second part of your question is very important. We are, and this might be different than the way some of you are working, we are a part of a reentry initiative that offers a multitude of other services. Our piece of this pie is just to offer support, is just to offer mentoring, what we like to call peer support, coaching, encouragement, and so it's not to necessarily offer substance abuse treatment, not to offer housing, not to offer transportation services. Now, having said that, at times we've been incredibly effective at helping our guys find jobs and helping with that employment piece. With substance abuse issues, dozens of the men and women who mentor for us as volunteers have a substance abuse background. And so they serve as much as a sponsor for the person that they're working with as a mentor. But that's not what we're contracted to do. That's a great question. Dante's story here.
Can I ask you?
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm sorry. Please do.
Oftentimes we go to a lot of these wonderful conferences on various grants, and we see a lot of tools, like I noticed you have your mentoring applications and things that you're already doing. But then we are challenged to go back home and kind of reinvent the wheel because those tools or those resources are not shared.
Yeah, I will share everything with you. And I'm I'm not just saying that because I'm on camera at the moment, and I'm on camera at the moment, so now you can hold me to it, right? No, my email address is on the one handout. Please email me. We have forms we've developed, applications. I will send you our training manuals. We are primarily a Christian ministry. We are secondarily a contractor with the state of Michigan. Okay. And so we would love to see, if what we have is helpful to you, we would love to have you use it. Dante's story, very quickly, and I want to make sure we leave time for questions here. Dante's story, he spent 43 years in prison. And this man, when he came out, I want you to picture a very thick Italian accent, and he's sitting across the table from me. He was never supposed to get released. He had a governor's pardon. And he's sitting across the table from me, and he looks at me in the eye, first-degree murder, right, 43 years ago, looks at me and he goes, "Terry, I want two things from you. I want a mentor, and I want a good church." And I said, "Yes, Godfather." Great guy, great example of what rehabilitation can do. This is a man who reprogrammed his thinking over the 40-plus years he was in prison, and he has been doing wonderfully for the last 2 years. Since he was released. Now, when he was released, it created quite a stir. There are a lot of people who would have just assumed he would have never been released. But I can tell you this is someone who is doing quite well in the community. Collaborative relationships also open doors to recruit volunteer mentors from the community. And this is how we do this. We network through local churches. Now, if you're not coming at this from a faith-based perspective, plug in where you see the word churches, the group or the organizations that you have connections to. We do it through networking with churches, and we also now have quite a few of referrals. As we've grown, and this is something to look forward to, as your organization grows, what you're going to find is that people who are mentoring for you are going to refer their friends to you. That's a fun place to get to. But when we hit a new county, let me give you just the example of Saginaw County. When we started working in Saginaw County, I just was like a cockroach and plagued the pastors of that county for the first month. Phone calls, emails, I'd stop in to visit them. They were all very tired of seeing me after the first month. That's what you have to do. You do have to beat the bushes. You do have to get out there. You have to make the contacts. And you realize that if you get 1 out of 10, you're doing quite well. All right? The best thing to do, if someone says, you know, I'm just not interested in what you're doing, move on. Don't waste any more time. Move on, okay? You have to find the people who have a heart for this. I would love to be able to say, and I can say this as a pastor, I'd love to be able to say that every pastor in a church has a heart for this. It's not true. So you have to move on, and you have to find the ones that do. Once you network with the churches and you have referrals, then you offer a mentor training. We offer an introductory training that gets people going, but then we also have ongoing training and consultation as well. I'm going to move through these kind of quickly because we're running low on time. Recruiting potential mentors, we do it through networking with churches, established connections that we have, creating new connections. Very important to us is to cross denominational lines. We network with community groups, with recovery groups. Often what you find in recovery groups are people who already have a heart for this type of work. And so those are great people to work with. We'll move past that one. This is what our mentor training covers, basically. Client testimonies, reentry issues and services, father absence issue, mentor testimony, success stories, a philosophical foundation for mentoring, what a good mentor is, what a good mentor is not, the level of commitment that's expected. That's very important to go over with people who are volunteering to help you. Process for matching mentoring partners. How does that happen? How are you going to put that together? Are you assigning someone a mentoring partner, or are you letting them make that decision? Okay, it's a very important piece to think through. Reporting to the mentoring director, of course, because you're grant recipients, all of this has to get documented, and the not so fun side of what you're doing, if you're like me at all, is the documentation aspect. But you know, how will they report to you? Safety and boundaries issues, what the mission of mentoring is. In other words, what's the strategy in that mentoring relationship? What do you want those mentoring relationships to achieve? Just traits like listening, thinking errors, criminal behavior, setting goals. Those are all important aspects. Another important piece, of course, is the case management issue, making those connections between clients and mentors, the record keeping, developing those connections to other service providers, churches, and support groups, and then, of course, consultation and team building. Collaborative relationships also build bridges to other service providers and community stakeholders. Mentoring is most effective when it's in conjunction with these other pieces. And so if you have a reentry initiative that you're a part of, that's great. If you don't, you need to begin to build bridges to things like housing, safe and affordable housing, employment, mental health services, life skills, anger management, socialization, substance abuse counseling, right? We don't want to think that mentoring is the end all. Mentoring is one piece of the puzzle. When I think about our success rate with the guys we're working with, I'm always thinking about it in the context of collaboration with other services. If someone doesn't have a job, one of the most frustrating things for me as I personally mentor guys is to sit across the table from someone who can't find work. I can encourage them, and just like Dean said, it's so important to be able to be that person who's still encouraging and supporting them when they can't find work. But boy, if I can help them find a job, what have I just done? I've changed a very practical need in their life at that point. Collaborative relationships build bridges for future program development and expansion. I would just point out we've grown from 1 county to 9 counties in 3 years, and we are still looking at opportunities for future expansion, and collaboration has been the key. And it gives you a seat at the table to influence current policy. One of the things that really has been a detriment to us in Michigan was the idea that someone who's working with someone inside of a correctional facility is not able to continue to mentor that person once they're released because of this idea of overfamiliarization. From my perspective, overfamiliarization is what we want. I would call that relationship. And so I cornered some people who I was at a meeting with who were kind of higher up in the Lansing or in the Michigan Department of Corrections, and said this is something we really need to work with and we need to change. And there are some steps that are being taken in that direction. So, but coming to the table as a servant and offering a service with excellence is what gets you a seat at that table. That's how you do that. If you're sloppy and you're not giving them what they want, then you can't expect to get what you want, right? So provide your service with excellence and you'll be helping to develop the best practices. Collaborative relationships also give you a seat at the table to have a voice in the future direction through informal discussions, phone calls, emails, steering team meetings, advisory councils, state committees, and national conferences. So let me encourage you to develop a relationship with a reentry program, correctional facilities, parole department, law enforcement, service providers, and business leaders, because that's going to help with that job piece as well. And the last thing I would like you to think about, because when I was first asked to direct this program, there was no expectation for me to mentor people myself. I have been the most rewarding part of this has been mentoring guys myself. So no matter how big you get, keep your feet on the ground and stay a part of the work, and that would be very helpful. All right, gang, it is 12:01, and I think Dean has abandoned me. I will be happy to try to answer any questions. See, CSG, Leanne's in the back. Leanne, there was a strategic error in having Dean and I do this. We're both Baptist preachers. And you never ask 2 Baptist preachers to speak quickly. So if there are any questions that I can try to answer, I'd be happy to.
Your background checks and things like that, or your mentors?
Absolutely, yeah, very important. We are fortunate in that the parole department does that for us, and so they do all of the background checks for us. We've actually tried to. This is another area we've tried to work with the Michigan Department of Corrections on to maybe loosen up some of those restrictions. The parole supervisors we're working with currently have said 5 years off paper before someone can be a mentor. I think that's perhaps a bit strict, a bit restrictive, and so we're trying to actually loosen up that process. But yeah, background checks are quite crucial.
I really do believe in God. I think it just takes too much faith to be an atheist. Okay?
They believe in God too.
And yeah, you're right. I just told my story about the bad ushers. Okay? I'm gonna read you what I just got. And I'm gonna read you this story from one of our congregations. And it's a church that you know, Leanne, that you've worked with. This pastor just sent me this, and remember we're talking about this is about changing the culture of the congregation. I got this while I was sitting here. I can't, you can't make this up. A young man, age 42, was released from prison after 17 years for murder last Friday, and he called me last night because I wasn't in church. This is the pastor. She wasn't there. She wasn't there. He said the first thing he did after his release was eat his mother's cooking, and then he went to church. His sister attends my church, family connection. Anyway, he attended my church this past Sunday, and the first thing he did was to greet my usher. To his surprise, the usher was the sister of the man he killed. They knew each other. She greeted him and said, "I forgive you. I wanted to come and see you, but DOC would not let me. Welcome to our church." He fell to the floor and cried. The young man's sister who brought him to church, my member, did not know that my usher was the murdered man's sister. The church celebrated, prayed for the young man who gave us testimony about what he had done and his journey. There's more, but to make a wonderful story short, he didn't want any publicity for this, and my usher is through with it now. But I thought that you would want to hear this story.
Wow.
What's the statement?
He says, second one.
Mentoring program reputation. Yeah, great question. He's referring to the part in the handout that gives the models, and this is actually something I stole from Leanne. I don't know if I've ever told her that, but how MPRI works through the three phases and what our role is there. One of the most successful ways we have new clients want to be a part of our program. In other words, the men and women coming out of prison, one of the ways in which we're able to recruit them most successfully is through word of mouth inside of the correctional facilities with the guys. And let me give you just one example. This is one of those things you never hope happens, but again, since we've both been referring to faith quite a bit. Forgive me, being a Baptist preacher, it's hard not to. But one of the coolest God experiences I've seen is in Macomb Correctional Facility, where I'm teaching my class. There's now a guy on the unit who had a mentor in our program for a year. Now he messed up and he went back to prison. So do I hold him up as this great success story? Well, not yet. But the cool thing is that he's back in the correctional facility. He's on the unit where I'm teaching my class, and every month when I'm teaching my class, he comes into my class and talks to the guys for 10 minutes about what his mentor has meant to him. He says, where are those guys that I was getting high with? Where are they at? My own family, they don't come to visit me. But you know who is up here every single week to visit me? My mentor. He said, this program is the best decision I've ever made. My mentor has become my best friend. So it's things like that, stories like that where the guys will refer our program to other people. Once you start doing it well, though, once you start doing it with excellence, and the guys know that you're legit and that you really do care about them, they will be interested.